But let me bring you to the story at hand. The latest ASIC data shows that construction sector leads the nation's insolvencies. In fact, it's so bad in construction at the moment, there's been a 24% increase over last year of construction companies going under. Now consider this. Housing demand is phenomenal. Government incentives are pouring money in. But my next guest says there is simply no foreseeable way that the Albanese government will achieve their housing target of 1.2 million homes in the next 5 years. And immigration, which is already at record high levels, is making it worse, not better. Leith Van Onselen is a former Commonwealth Treasury official. These days he writes at macrobusiness.com.au. Leith Van Onselen, why is it that there are so many construction companies collapsing when there is so much incentive to build financially?
Yeah, g'day, Steve. Look, the main reason for it is because construction costs, so that's the cost of building materials and all the things that go into building a house or apartment, have gone up by more than 40% since the pandemic. So as a result, builders are sort of caught between this rock and a hard place whereby they can't deliver stock at a profitable level. And that is created a major handbrake on housing construction. And it's one of the reasons why, despite the fact that home prices have gone up so much in the last few years, we're still seeing, lots of builders going under, and they're struggling to make a profit at the moment, which just means that this housing construction target from the federal government is just completely unrealistic.
So the government Australians have just elected overwhelmingly, massively. There's no chance they will reach their housing target in the next 5-year period.
Oh, absolutely no chance. So just to put some numbers around that, the Albanese government's 1.2 million homes over 5 years target requires 240,000 homes to be delivered every single year for 5 years. Now, Australia's record construction, so our single best year ever, was in about 2017 when we built about 222,000 homes. So I think actually 223,000 homes. So it was already about 14% less. In our very best year in history, it was 14% less than the Albanese government's, target. And there is just no chance that, given the macroeconomic conditions we've got with these really high costs, we've got labour shortages because state governments are frantically trying to build infrastructure to keep up with the high population growth. We've also got this renewable energy transition, which requires a massive build out of, all sorts of renewables infrastructure. We just don't have the labour to build these homes. It's too expensive to build these homes, and also land prices are just simply too high. So the cost of building homes is simply far too high, and it's way above what buyers can afford to pay. And as a result, actual building levels are running around 30% less than the Albanese government's target.
You used in your analysis the word hyperinflation when it comes to land costs. Are you serious about that?
Oh, absolutely serious. Land costs in Australia, the lot prices for new homes has absolutely soared across the nation over the past decade. So, if you're living in Sydney,
hyperinflation, Leith Van Onselen. Hyperinflation.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I'll give you the example of Sydney. So in Sydney, as of September last year, the median lot price in Sydney was $710,000, and that's up from $325,000 a decade earlier. And we've had similar cost inflation across all the other capitals, where prices have, nearly doubled or roughly doubled in a decade. And the cost of and thinking about this, Steve, that the land sizes that we're talking about here have actually shrunk in size. So the per square metre cost is even greater again. And when you couple excessively high land costs with excessively high cost to put the structure on top of that land, it's just simply too expensive to build housing in Australia. And the worst thing is everyone keeps saying, oh, that's okay, we'll just build apartments because you don't need as much land. The problem is it costs more to build an apartment than it does a detached house. It's significantly more expensive to build an apartment than a detached house. So apartments aren't the solution either because they're too expensive.
And as a result, we have record levels of construction company insolvencies. 24% over what the rate over what it was last year. What was the warning? What was the warning by the head of Mirvac?
So can I just add something quickly to that? So it's 24% higher than last year, but last year was a record as well. So actually construction insolvencies are running at double what they were pre-pandemic, what the norm was pre-pandemic. But the Mirvac CEO, Campbell Hennon, I think his name is, he warned that the collapse of around 7,000 builders and subcontractors in the previous 3 years is basically hamstrung the industry to actually provide homes. So we've lost all these builders at the same time as the government wants to build more homes, and there just isn't the capacity there. And he also said that it's quite astonishing that tier one builders, so talking about the big builders, are still losing money 4 years after the pandemic started, and they're losing money again because these costs have gone up by about 40% or just over 40% since the pandemic started. So it's just too expensive to build housing in Australia at the moment for a variety of reasons, and that just means that less housing is going to be built at the same time as the government has the throttle on immigration.
My guest is Leith Van Onselen. He's an economist. He's a former Commonwealth Treasury official. These days he's at macrobusiness.com.au. Leith Van Onselen, you analysed the recent Infrastructure Australia report as well. What did it reveal?
Yeah, so actually, what I did was, Steve, I went back and I looked at an Infrastructure Australia report from 2019, so 6 months before the pandemic, and Infrastructure Australia warned that Australia wasn't building nearly enough infrastructure to keep up with population growth. Bear in mind, this was in 2019, and it said that we needed $40 billion of extra investment a year for 5 years straight, so $200 billion just simply to catch up. Now, if you fast forward from there, Steve, to May to the current time, Australia has added 2.2 million people since 2019 when Infrastructure Australia made this warning. That is roughly the equivalent of adding a Perth. So we've added a Perth's population since 2019, and we hadn't built enough infrastructure in 2019. Infrastructure Australia issued a dire report. And then Infrastructure Australia also has a workforce supply dashboard. Now what that does is it basically shows how many workers Australia has to meet the nation's infrastructure needs versus what the demand, how much of the infrastructure we actually need. And what it shows is that we've got basically far less workers. We've got roughly half as many workers to build the infrastructure we need than the infrastructure we need, if that makes sense. So the demand for infrastructure is running about double what the possible supply of infrastructure is based on the amount of workers we've got. So all this tells you, Steve, is that, if the situation was dire in 2019, as Infrastructure Australia said, and we've added 2.2 million people since that time through very high immigration, which is a Perth's worth of people, and we don't have enough workers to build the infrastructure, which is what their dashboard says. Why are we persisting with this incredibly high immigration program when we just can't build the infrastructure for it? And the latest federal budget said that we're going to add 1.8 million people in the next 5 years. The latest population statement from the Centre for Population, which was released in December by the Australian Treasury, said that Australia is going to add 13.5 million people in the next 40 years, which is equivalent to adding another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane to the current population in just 40 years. Where is the infrastructure going to come from to satisfy all these extra people that are projected to come by the government through high immigration? Where is the housing going to come from? It's just an impossible equation we're facing.
Well, so what does Infrastructure Australia say about the immigration rate into Australia? Because the argument is that
they
immigrants
never comment.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, unfortunately, Infrastructure Australia, because it's obviously a government organisation, they never comment on the level of immigration. All they say is that infrastructure is not keeping pace with population growth. And they warn that repeatedly, and the government continually ignores Infrastructure Australia, and they continue to run this very high immigration program, which is actually still still historically high and close to the highest in history. When we cannot build enough housing, we cannot build enough infrastructure for it. That should be plain as day. If the problem was dire in 2019, when we had significantly lower immigration than we do now, well, what do you think the problem is now and into the future as we maintain these incredibly high immigration rates? We just cannot build the infrastructure for it. We haven't done it for 20 years. So the notion that we can add 13.5 million people in the next 40 years, which is the official projection, again, that is the equivalent of another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Just think of all the houses and infrastructure in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. All that needs to be replicated in the next 40 years to stop productivity and living standards from collapsing. And it's just an impossible task. It cannot be done.
So
the government continues to ignore it.
So on the basis of the reports you've been analysing, things are going to get much, much worse. I mean, already in this city, you need to be a millionaire to buy the average house. The level of homelessness in Brisbane is really quite, I mean, it's always troubling, but it's actually becoming, people have never seen it so bad. And what you're telling me is no one in the federal government is actually tackling the core driver of this. They're actually making it worse.
Absolutely, they're making it worse. And unfortunately, the latest immigration data, so just yesterday we received the latest permanent long-term arrivals data, which is a proxy for immigration. It basically tracks it almost, one for one. It's a monthly report done from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. What it showed is over the first quarter of 2025, 188,000 net permanent and long-term arrivals arrived in Australia. And that's only marginally below, we're talking, 7,000 below the absolute peak of the same time last year. So we're still running immigration at incredible levels. Sure, it's down a little bit from last year, but based on this data, it's rebounded again from late last year. It's gone back up. And we're spending an immigration rate that is amongst the very highest in this nation's history.
Are any other countries around the world winding back their immigration levels?
Absolutely, they are. Canada, which embarked on a similar crazy policy post-COVID, has implemented a 3-year freeze in its population. It wants to freeze its population for 3 years. And the United Kingdom just this week announced it's going to significantly cut immigration as well because it says it's been too high and it can't keep up. So, Canada and the UK are cutting back because they recognise that the high post-COVID immigration is unsustainable and has created a lot of problems in both countries, like rental crisis, infrastructure shortages, all sorts of things. And yet Australia is not choosing to go the same direction. And again, the official projection from the federal budget in March was that we're going to grow by 1.8 million people in the next 5 years. And 1.4 million of that is going to be in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, which just means the housing shortage is going to continue. We're going to continue to have not enough infrastructure. And it means that the situation is going to continue to get worse. And again, the very long-term projection is for 13.5 million people in the next 40 years, another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane in just 40 years. This is unsustainable stuff. It is unrealistic. We cannot build enough houses. We cannot build enough infrastructure. And where's the water supply going to come from? Where's the energy? All these sorts of things.
I'll leave it there. Leith and Anton, thanks for your time once again.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Leith